everyone, to Washoe County Library System's new monthly series from the Historic Reno Preservation Society. Tonight's topic is A Taste of History, presented by Sharon Honig-Bear. My name is Judy, and I'm so happy to be with you tonight. Washoe County Library System and the Historic Reno Preservation Society will feature a different topic and speaker the first Tuesday of every month through April, except December. Be sure to sign up at events.washoecountylibrary.us. This event is live and can be viewed via Zoom and Washoe County Library System's Facebook events page. If you missed an event, you can watch archived events on our website. Want to learn more about Nevada history? Explore the online Nevada Encyclopedia, and you can access this from our website at www.washoecountylibrary.us and click on resources. And now I would like to introduce Carol Coleman with the Historic Reno Preservation Society. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. I am so excited about this event. So thank you. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Judy, and hello to everyone. Thank you for taking the time this evening to watch this program given to you by Historic Reno Preservation Society, which we call HARPS. I'm happy to be president of HARPS and so proud that we can bring these to you. On this election eve, it's time to take a break away from all of the stress and waiting to see what's happening. And we know you're really going to enjoy this presentation that Sharon's going to give you. Watch for it on the HARPS website in a couple of weeks so you can see it again or first time. So now I'm going to introduce Sherry Hayes-Zorn, who's the program co-chair for HARPS and responsible for bringing these programs to you. Sherry?
Thank you, Carol. Well, thank you for everybody for coming in to Zoom this evening to watch this wonderful program. And I want to thank Sharon, our guest speaker this evening, for coming up with this great topic and her passion as a restaurant, columnist. She did that with the RGJ, and the last 4 years she has worked as a columnist for Edible Reno-Tahoe. And so these are a combination of these stories that about the region, about Reno, and a lot of these images that you'll be seeing this evening were not included in those original stories. Sharon is a lifelong board member for Historic Reno Preservation, HARPS, the past president, and of course a tour leader for our Historic Reno Preservation Society, the home tours as well as the walking tours. So without further ado, because I know many of you already know Sharon, we want to introduce Sharon. Thank you so much for coming.
My turn. Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all settled in and that I may serve, as Carol said, as a bit of a diversion on this momentous election night. Hopefully you have something to nibble on, since I might tempt you in the next hour or so with a taste for history. There's everything I was going to say to introduce myself. I think has already been said, except that I love history and I love food, and it's just wonderful to be able to bring the two elements together in this particular column. Like James Beard, I believe food is a common ground, a universal experience. I'm here today to share some of the interesting stories that I've uncovered while writing pieces for Edible Reno-Tahoe. I don't always know where these stories are going to go. If you're not familiar with the magazine itself, it's a glossy magazine, comes out every other month. You can get it by subscription, or you can pick it up in many restaurants and bars, at least in normal times, and shops around town. The territory that's covered in the magazine includes northwestern Nevada. I kind of put this little funky map together, but this is the area where I'm searching out stories. Tonight, I'm going to focus mostly on Reno stories because we are sponsored tonight by Historic Reno Preservation Society. But this is my beat. My column is called Edible Traditions, and it's the perfect blend of history and food, and as I said, the perfect subject for me to research and write about. The column originated with Jen Huntley, and then Alicia Barber did it for some time, and Alicia recommended me to take over when she was ready to move on. Alicia told me right from the beginning that the real challenge was finding good images to go with your stories, because images are essential in a magazine. They need to be printable quality as well. And that's often a problem when you're dealing with vintage and historical photos. They're often in pretty poor condition. Some stories so far have gone untold because I've just not been able to find the right images to go with them. For instance, I know there were early Japanese fish markets in Reno, but I've yet to find an image for that. You never know where the inspiration will hit. I examine books, old newspapers, clipping files. It may be listening to people about restaurants, farm stands, or the ice cream they enjoyed when they were children. Or it could be from excursions. It really could also come from you. If you have a good idea, let me know about it. And at the end, one of my last slides will give you my contact information, because I'd love to hear from you if you have a story that I should pursue. The first story I'm going to talk about is part of several that I wrote about the Victorian era. And this one, the Mackie Silver. The story is about an example of lavish Victorian table setting. And many of you may recognize the statue of John Mackie on the UNR campus. The Mackie name should sound familiar. John Mackie, often called the Silver King, made his fortune on the Comstock Lode, and he lived like royalty. The Mackie name should also sound familiar. Places like Mackey Stadium and the Mackey School of Mines on the university campus. Now, I was asked, this was one story where I didn't dig it up myself. I was asked by the magazine editors to cover this story, and I happily did. And I called it Nevada's Own Treasure, the Mackie Silver, and it appeared in the Cook's 2018 issue. Mackies were establishing a home in France, and they wanted to wow the Parisians. An elaborate Victorian dinner set would do the trick. By the way, if any of the stories I mentioned today intrigue you enough that you want to look at the entire story or anything else, all of the stories are available online. They're completely searchable online at edible-reno-tahoe.com. Sometimes doing a story takes me away from my intention of the Silver State, deep into the history of food service. The Mackie Silver is an example. The wealthy always dined to impress, but things heated up significantly in the early 19th century when Russian Ambassador Alexander Kirkin brought service à la Russe, that service in the Russian style, to France. And this is where the Mackies were headed. This style of dining was marked by a succession of courses, often a dozen or more. Presentation was important as the food itself. You started to see menus at each place setting, and there were place cards telling you where you should be sitting. Etiquette books and a set of rigid, correct rules appeared for cutlery, china, and table adornments. And if any of you ever were a fan and watched Downton Abbey, the opening sequence there often showed how the servants would be measuring to the edge of the table exactly how the plates and silverware should be from the edge of the table. That kind of precision was part of what service was like at that time. This was the world in which the Mackie family commissioned their silver service, and which necessitated such arcane cutlery as celery vases, melon eaters, olive forks, ham holders, and so much more. The silver goblets that were there for each person weighed a pound empty, and that was pure silver. This is the former display cabinet. Another slide, I'll show you what the display looks like now. In 1877, Mackey shipped a half-ton of silver to New York to Tiffany and Company to design and produce a silver service for his wife, Marie Louise. It took 4 boxcars, we're talking about train boxcars, to ship the bullion. There were 1,250 pieces, providing dinner and dessert service for 24 people. Charles Grogin of Tiffany was the designer, and Edward C. Moore supervised the project. Tiffany classifies, and this was something I learned I always learn something when I'm writing these pieces. Tiffany classifies this style of silverware as Indian, referring to the workmanship of Persia, Mughal India, and the dense overall decoration of Near Eastern metalwork. So these were very elaborate, heavily decorated. It was reported that 200 craftsmen worked exclusively on the task for 2 years, totaling over 1 million hours of workmanship. It was described as the largest, the grandest, the most elegantly ornate, and the most famous set of its time. Mackey purchased the dies so the set could never be duplicated. But actually, the set was so personalized, it's hard to imagine anyone else owning it. Whoops, sorry. Back, and you'll see why here, how personalized it was. Here we have the interwoven MLM for Mary Louise Mackey, since tradition dictated that the silver actually belonged to the lady of the household. And these monograms, are found on many of the pieces. Mary Louise's family name was Hungerford, and her family crest appears on many of the items. And they also drew from their heritage. So other motifs include the Irish shamrock, the Scottish thistle, and they included American garden and wildflowers into the designs. So as I said, these were a very personalized design that's hard to believe anybody would really want to copy. UNR used the remaining items. They did retain a certain number of the items until the 1980s. And for a while, the silver was considered the state silver. President Truman enjoyed it when he did a visit in 1960 and visited the campus. In 1998, Christie's, the big auction house, auctioned a Mackey punch bowl and ladle for $222,500. I like to tie in the history, and you'll see this in these stories. I take the history, but I like to tie it as much as I can to the present. So UNR still owns over 70 items, and they're now in this beautiful display room downstairs at the Keck Museum on the campus. The man with the bow tie and the white shirt is Garrett Barmore, and Garrett's the curator of the museum there. And as he said, I interviewed him for this, it is no longer a service, it's now an art piece. Interestingly, he said little is written about the set, and the full story rests probably in the Tiffany archives yet to be explored. And I kind of teased him, when it's time for him to retire, maybe that'll be what he'll do, is go move to New York for a while and investigate all of this. And you can just see how beautiful this new room is. It's dimly lit, it's in beautiful display cases, you can walk all around, and it's just magnificent. Garrett shared another interesting story. Many of the Mackey silver items are still owned by family members, and periodically when they have a reunion, people bring their inherited pieces, and for a short time, much of the family silver is reassembled. A rule from a Victorian era etiquette book states, never make an ostentatious display of wealth. The Mackeys clearly had no interest in following the rules. The Mackey Silver is an opulent and artistic monument to high Victorian taste. When the set was finally delivered to the Mackeys, the arrival of the 9 walnut and mahogany chests must have looked like a parade. It must have been a relief, though, to Tiffany not to need to pack it up in their iconic little blue boxes for all 1,250 pieces. Leaving the Victorian era, I present The Big Chill. Chisholm ice cream set the standards for decades, and this appeared in the summer 2019 issue. I was surprised as I scoured old newspapers how many ice cream companies there have been in the area, but one stood out, Chisholm Dairy. It was perhaps the earliest, most successful, and there are still vestiges of the family and business to this day. Debbie Heyman wrote an excellent story for Footprints, but I still wanted to include the story here. Cream practically ran through the veins of the Chisholm clan. In 1880, they purchased 115 acres west of town in the area of West 2nd Street. Along the Truckee River, they built a ranch, farm, an elegant brick home, and founded Chisholm Creamery. It flourished from 1903 to 1912 under son John, who became Nevada's leading dairyman. But this is really the story of Ed Warren Chisholm, the 4th son of the family. Ingenious, inventive, entrepreneurial, these are apt descriptions for Ed. Over 100 years ago, he carved out an icy niche by bringing ice cream to homes and businesses throughout northern Nevada. In 1905, in the ranch's old milk house, he'd concoct the base, the ice cream base. If you've ever laboriously, and I have, hand-cranked ice cream, you'll admire Ed's ingenuity when he unhooked the grindstone from the property's water wheel on the Truckee and used it to churn the mixture. He then carted it back to the milk house for packaging, turning out 25 gallons of ice cream a day. Compare that to today's total frozen dairy annual production in the United States of more than 1.6 billion gallons. Uh-oh, I think, yeah. Here's another one of a wonderful photo. This story, and some of them was very easy for me to find images. Quick turnaround was important at a time when there was not refrigeration. Ed sold the ice cream daily, peddling door to door, first by horse-drawn carriage. By 1910, Ed hired his first ice cream maker and expanded the delivery area to Sparks. Loaded with that same entrepreneurial spirit, Ed marketed to soda fountains, with Wilson's Drug Company being the first. And here is one of the first motorized delivery vehicles that he used. And this is Ed with his daughter Alice in 1921. With the profusion of wonderful photos, you can trace the success and expansion of the business through the images. In 1918, Ed was turning a profit and moved manufacturing downtown to 247 West Street, which is now a parking lot. Within 3 years, Chisholm Ice Cream was producing over 100,000 gallons of ice cream annually. And he had 18 employees and a fleet of 5 motor vehicles. And here is an example of one. This was on a calendar, I believe, for October 1921. A series of expansions followed over the years, and a significant one was when Ed acquired the 7-Up bottling franchise in 1936. Time moves on, but there are remains of this prominent businessman. This is Ed's house, designed by famed architect Frederick de Longchamp, and this is at 575 Ridge Street. And some of you may know Historic Reno Preservation Society. Typically, this has not been a typical year, we do a historic home tour in the fall, and this house was open to the public several years ago. The former homestead and ranch is now known as the Elm Estate Event Venue. Can you find the original home? This is actually the original home. This was a later addition, and much of this other buildings have been added more recently, making it a event venue. And I was just out there, and now the pond is gone. And I love that one of the Chisholm wagons lives on. This is one of those ones that Ed used back in 1905 to deliver his ice cream. And it was lovingly restored a couple of years ago by local preservationist Lauren John, and that's Lauren over here, and his buddy Jack Hirsch, who's not in the photo. But also in the photo are descendants of Ed. This is David Chisholm and his wife, Nikki. Okay, now we're going to move just a little south of Reno. And this is Letting Off Steam, Wellness, and the Steamboat Hot Springs appeared in the spring 2018 issue. As much as possible, I try to write my story to match the theme that the editors select. I don't always have that choice. They pick the theme, and I try to figure out what story can I do to match it. Sometimes this is easy and sometimes not. I was pretty stumped for their wellness theme a couple of years ago until I came across this wonderful photo of Chicken Soup Hot Springs. I hope you can read that sign. Because what miracle cure is there better than chicken soup? Steamboat Hot Springs, also known as the Saratoga of the West, is located 11 miles south of Reno. The springs were popular with native groups, early settlers, famous visitors. Even a famous horse came to the thermal springs to, quote, take the waters, and as a way to cure many ills and to contribute to their overall wellness. By the way, I was able to find a number of really good images for this story too. Yes. I'm always happy if I can work Mark Twain into my talks. And he publicized the steamboat name in 1863, saying, "From one spring, the boiling water is ejected a foot or more by the infernal force at work below. And in the vicinity of all of them, one can hear a constant rumbling and surging, somewhat resembling the noises peculiar to a steamboat in motion." Hence the name. And who better than Mark Twain should understand the sounds of a steamboat? Visitors were seeking promised cures for blood disorders, rheumatism, or nervous imbalance. It was Dr. James Ellis, a hydrotherapist from England, who created buzz about the springs when he established a hospital on the premises in 1861. The timing was perfect, since the nearby silver mines on the Comstock Lode brought traffic and renown. Volume further increased in 1871, and that's what I'm showing in this image, when the Virginia and Truckee Railroad was extended from Reno, making Steamboat only a half-an-hour train ride from downtown Reno. The Grand Hotel, a dance hall, and a saloon were added. President Ulysses S. Grant and his family even visited in 1879. One hot spring became especially famous and was described in 1879 in the Nevada State Journal. And this is the quote. "Among the springs is one that when salt and pepper are added to the waters, tastes so near like chicken soup that it will deceive anyone. In fact, some go as far as to say it out-chickens the original article." Renamed Chicken Soup Hot Springs, the water was analyzed in the 1880s and found to contain, are you ready? Natural chlorine, sodium, silica, borate, sulfate, carbonate, potassium, lithium, calcium, arsenic, phosphate, antimony, magnesium, alumina, iron and mercury. Not exactly your mother's chicken soup. The springs and the site were victims of natural disasters. On December 10th, 1900, an earthquake caused the hot springs, and there was a geyser that went 100 feet into the air, and this earthquake caused them all to dry up. A year later, a wildfire burned the hotel and most of the other buildings. In 1925, Dr. Edna Carver bought the land, drilled a new well, and she built the Pioneer State Health Hotel. Nature again triumphed with another devastating fire in 1937 and yet another one in 1942. Dr. Carver envisioned a major resort. She brought in noted African-American architect Paul Revere Williams. Now, this is the gentleman who designed the Lear Theater downtown, Rancho San Rafael House in Reno, and he was widely known as the architect to the stars. And he created this master plan for the resort, but it was never built. The area is still thermally active, again, bringing the story to the present. The area is still thermally active, and you can still take the waters at the Steamboat Healing Center and Spa. And this is just a picture of the plaque there, because the site is listed on the Nevada Register of Historic Places. So let's talk turkey. Who would have thought that there would be more than one turkey story in the region? I wrote about Minnie Blair's Fallon turkeys in the winter 2016 issue, but here I'm going to focus on a Reno story, which leads me to Frank Margrave. The story of Frank Margrave's enormous turkey ranch in Reno came from a walking tour that I do on Court Street. At 470 Court, I knew a Frank Margrave lived there and was able to buy the DeLongchamp designed home with money from his turkey farm, but that's all I knew. Writing this column gave me the opportunity to do more research, and this piece appeared in the winter 2018 issue. What I found was more than a story about gobblers, but it was urban sprawl, farmland lost to housing development, and changes to agricultural practices. Now, here's a food tidbit that most of you probably don't know. I didn't. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt moved the Thanksgiving holiday 1 week earlier to the third Thursday in November to help bolster retail sales during one of the final years of the Depression. It was nicknamed Franksgiving, but wasn't popular at all. So 2 years later, in 1941, Congress reversed the move and set it to the fourth Thursday in November, where it remains today. Margrave was motivated by World War II, when President Roosevelt asked people to raise all the poultry meat possible. Enter Margrave. A Tennessean by birth, he moved to Nevada during the goldfield mining boom in the 1920s, eventually finding success with the Nevada Packard mine in Pershing County. When his mill burned down and World War II intervened, Margrave came to Reno. In a move echoed by other mine owners, he bought a ranch and started a new career as the Turkey King, which was a name given to him by the Reno Evening Gazette in 1945. His ranch was located, quote, south of Reno on 50 acres near the Carson Road, which we now call Virginia Street. On today's map, this would be the area south of Plum Lane, east of where Park Lane Mall eventually was built. The ranch was short-lived from 1944 to 45, but that Thanksgiving, November 1945, he had 10,000 birds ready for Thanksgiving tables. Interestingly, this was the only photo I could find of Margrave and his turkeys. And even with a careful photoshopping of the grainy print, the quality was poor. We used it only because there was no other one available. Margrave didn't even bet on the right turkey. He invested in a then popular variety called the broad-breasted bronze, which was a domesticated bird with beautiful iridescent bronze-like plumage. And I was able to find this vintage postcard, and we were able to use that. The little bit of color really made the page come alive. But he soon discovered these bronze birds have a shorter natural lifespan because of their large size, and they have, even worse, a very poor reproduction rate. Once these were the most popular turkeys, but the importance of them was waning as the broad-breasted white began its domination that continues to this day. Margrave legacies. This is a shot of the house that I mentioned at 470 Court Street. The area was well known as a neighborhood for prominent Renoites at the time. The house appears small from the street, particularly because it's only one story, but it's actually over 3,500 square feet. And a recent check on Zillow put the house's value at over $700,000. And as I said, this was designed by famed architect Frederick de Longchamp. This is where I think the story gets interesting, though, from turkey ranch to ranch houses. The ranch operated for 2 years before Margrave discovered a new vein of potential wealth: subdivision of the land for the development of small homes. Reno's population was booming, and returning veterans after World War II presented a perfect target market. In February 1946, Margrave presented a subdivision plat to the county planning board to develop a total of 252 acres, including the farmland, into a subdivision he was calling Sierra Acres. Things moved swiftly. Only months later, ads appeared offering lovely home sites for as little as $350. And now the subdivision was called now Sierra Meadows. And again, you were buying the lot. You would design or have someone build the house for you. I do like to point out, in a sad statement of the times, the neighborhood was described as restricted, meaning people of color need not apply. And this was fairly common in those post-war years. As you can see from the map, there is actually a street. This is Margrave. So now you know the story behind the man behind the street. Booze. Now I'll cover just a few stories that I wrote that revolved around the theme of alcohol. And I do that particularly because they do a drinks issue. The magazine does a drinks issue every year. This piece is called Early Reno Wineries, Crushing the Odds, and it was in the drinks issue in 2018. I hope that some of you have visited the wineries, the new wineries. There are 3 of them out on 4th Street, because this is a revival of a long story about winemaking in Reno. It's one of those what's old is new again. This photo shows Alpine Winery. This is at the corner of 2nd and Center. This was a very popular cafe at the time, Thomas's Cafe. And back here, this is the entrance to the Alpine Winery. Growing grapes is a challenge in the Silver States with the Silver States geography. So our history is much more about the bottling, blending, and selling than actually growing the mighty grape. The early winemakers brought their grapes from California to Reno by railroad car. The headline in a 1903 Reno Evening Gazette proclaimed a new industry. Well, this is 1903, when A.T. Dormio shipped, quote, mountains of grapes for his new winery on Peavine Street. We now call it Evans. And here's a good photo of what these box cars of grapes would have looked like coming over the mountains. Alpine Winery burst on the scene in 1912, proclaiming They make our wines in Santa Rosa, California, and can guarantee their purity. And this was important because it countered the fact that liquor was often adulterated in those pre-prohibition times. Alpine was owned by prominent Reno businessmen Edward and Caesar Vacina. In the early 1920s, Alpine Winery was a regular stop. This was during Prohibition, and it was a regular stop for the Prohibition agents. After Prohibition, the site was reborn as the Alpine Club, and then it was renamed the 116 or 116 Club. Winemaking days were over, but the club emerged as a center for Reno social life, attracting the elite of Reno society. And I really like, if this was an ad from a little book I found, the Historical Society, called the Just Wed Cookbooks. And they are talking about how important for a newlywed wines are for their table. I love this painting by local artist Roy Powers. Roy captured slices of old Reno, here of the famed Toscano and Colombo hotels, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, on Lake Street. And this was an ad painted on right on the building there for Barengo wines. And the brothers Bernardino and Pierino brought their wine from the Acampo winery in the Lodi area, and they labeled it with their own name. The year 1934 was a big one for the Barengos. They opened Sierra Wine and Liquor, which also handled bulk wine from their own winery in Galt, California. The liquor business thrived, and in 1958, Thelma and Pete Barengo bought the it was closed at that point, the Nevada, California, and Oregon depot, and they operated it as their distribution center for many years. Now, of course, it is has new life as the depot. The granddaddy of Reno restaurants and saloons would have to be the Wine House. It commanded a prominent location on Commercial Row and stood for over 80 years as a leading spot for locals and visitors. Founded in 1874 by Eli Francovich, he emigrated from Yugoslavia and arrived in Reno in 1859. Now understand, the city wasn't even laid out until 1868, so he was here even ahead of that. In the early years of the Wine House, barrels of wine were displayed prominently in the saloon, along with bottled spirits. Like many other businesses, it was involved with repeated indictments during Prohibition. Although it became, quote, a soft drink establishment, alcoholic drinks were being served via the back door. One of their legal tangles made it all the way to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. The names of the wineries have faded, but there is one legacy and that lives on. Search out a bottle, and it's that time of year, of the potently delicious holiday eggnog that is marketed under the name Francovich, and you are connected to the Wine House and the early days of Reno wineries and saloons. Keeping with the booze theme, I wrote The Pecan, a story with a punch for the Drinks 2017 issue. If there is one drink that defines our region, it is the Pecan Punch, that devilishly potent libation. I like to say that this classic cocktails recipe might read 1 part Africa and the French Foreign Legion, and blend it with an equal part of immigrant sheep herder. The key ingredient of the drink is the bitter aperitif called amer piquant. The name comes from the French word for bitter, which is amer, and the name of the creator of the aperitif, Gaëtan Piquant. Stationed as a sergeant in Algeria with the French Foreign Legion, he concocted the liqueur-like potion in 1837. Its intensely sweet and bitter flavors come from the dried orange peels, gentian, and cinchona, whose bark contains quinine. The ingredient served as an effective way to combat malaria and other diseases for the cavalry in North Africa. In Europe, Amer Picon was added to beer. The cocktail so well known here was all but unknown on the continent. By the way, I love these vintage and colorful posters. They're available on the internet, and after doing some research on copyright and trademark in international advertising, I discovered that these posters were old enough to use without needing permission, which is why we use them liberally, both in the print article and why I am using them liberally here today. Finding French pecan is an experience. People search out doors to find the elusive original. I once mentioned the problem to the bartender at Louis and that this picture was taken there, and he hesitated, then pulled out a bottle from under the bar and served me a shot glass so I could taste the real thing. He said some of the old timers bring him a bottle now and again. Most bars, though, use an inexpensive item and considered lesser quality, made by Turani. In its favor, it's higher in alcohol than the original. It's 78 proof versus 42 proof. And that contributes to the punch of the drink. Whatever Amer you start with, you're going to add grenadine, soda water, a float of brandy, and a twist of lemon, and you are imbibing a little bit of Basque tradition. A direct and magical link between the Basques and the pecan punch has proven elusive in research. It's speculated that the Basque knew Amer from the home country, but the cocktail itself seems a Basque American innovation. In the book, Chorizos in an Iron Skillet, author May Ancho Davis states, this drink is a true American Basque invention. The pecan was also popular in Italian establishments in San Francisco in the mid-1900s and in Basque dining halls throughout the West. How fitting that an aperitif that had its origins in the hot desert of North Africa would find new life in the high desert of northern Nevada and the West. Food is a cultural crossroads, and we've already touched on Basque, French, and Italians. Let's go a little further. Call this story Pasta la Vista, baby. Northern Nevada's love affair with noodles, and this appeared in the fall 2018 issue. The Italians brought their love of noodles to the region more than 150 years ago. They were drawn by the cheap land for farming or ranching, and many came to work on the railroads. By 1910, they were the largest European ethnic group in Nevada. Many of you probably recognize, I love this photograph of Johnny Casanari from Johnny's Little Italy, now Johnny's Ristorante Italiano. And I obtained this wonderful photo from his son. The term pasta was not used in early history. It was called paste, or they called it by its specific names, macaroni or vermicelli, spaghetti, whatever the shape was. When the term pasta appeared, it appeared usually tied to a traditional Italian recipe, like pasta fagioli. Again, I delved into the history of pasta making. In our rough frontier town, people either made their own or they ordered them from regional purveyors, mostly from the Bay Area. Things changed when we finally had a local manufacturer. Bianchi and Company Macaroni Factory was the most notable. A Nevada State Journal ad in February 1900 stated, "We invite you to place a trial order with us before sending away." They produced macaroni, vermicelli, spaghetti, and all Italian pastes. Nevadans now had a local source. You can see from this slide that a local manufacturers followed. And one of the most publicized businesses was the Purity Bakery and Macaroni Factory. You can see there's an ad there where it says Macaroni Factory. In 1919, it was described as the only macaroni factory in Nevada and has a splendid consuming territory. Until 1924, when nationally manufactured pastas became available routinely in grocery stores, bringing local manufacturing to a close. By the way, I chose a picture of Ronzoni products because this was the pasta that I ate growing up. Spaghetti winds its way into restaurants around the 1920s, probably again when commercial pasta was more readily available. The Mizpah Hotel, like so many, offered ravioli, spaghetti, or noodles at any time. We cook any style. Most dinners cost about $1. Sometimes the spaghetti was topped by strange, at least by today's tastes, sauces such as mushroom gravy or gratin style. Local businesses moved into commercial production. The Reno Ravioli Factory, owned by Lorenzo Zanini and Son, ran an ad in 1921 announcing ravioli, noodles, tagliarini made fresh every day in a sanitary kitchen. Inspection invited. When Lorenzo died in 1929, his two girls, known as the Zunini sisters, took over what was called the oldest ravioli factory in Nevada. One restaurant is the longtime champ of serving pasta, CASALE'S Halfway Club. It sits on the old Lincoln Highway, now 4th Street, halfway between Sparks and Reno. It's touted as the oldest continuously family-owned and operated restaurant in Reno, and possibly in the entire state of Nevada. It might be better called a family joint, filled with both old-timers and a legion of younger generations. Italian natives John and Elvira Casale opened a produce stand in the late 1930s. It soon expanded, and by 1941, besides fruit, Casale's Market offered homemade raviolis. Over the years, the menu continued to expand from ravioli to spaghetti, pizza, and other Italian specialties. Daughter, Mama Inez, married Casimir Steamboat Stempik in 1946, and he became part of the business. Mama Inez, the matriarch, died recently, followed soon after by her son, Tony. All indications are that the family will continue to run the business. It still is a family tradition to produce the homemade ravioli that inspires cult-like admiration. The Italians brought pasta to this region in the earliest days, but Americans are still Bush League in consumption compared to Italians. While we twirl 26 pounds annually, diners in Italy top the charts at 60 pounds. So get the water boiling. There's a lot of catching up to do. And I just threw in this photograph of Tony and Mama Inez and some of the rest of the family. Haven't gotten enough pasta? Well, let me take you to a piece that appeared in the summer 2016 issue that I called Ravioli Wars. I've always been fascinated with Lake Street and the early days of Reno, when this area was wonderfully diverse and colorful. It's hard to imagine it now, but Lake Street was once the vibrant backbone of Reno's international community. There were Japanese fish merchants, Chinese restaurants and opium dens, Basque hotels and restaurants, Jewish pawn shops, African-American clubs. Most prominent of all was a string of Italian hotels, grocery stores, and restaurants. The story of these Italian businesses is tale of change from seedy to respectability. And by the way, here's another shot. You can see Barango up on the building here, and this is the Toscano and the Colombo. During the first few decades of the 1900s, Italian immigration was at its height, and hotels, the Europa, the Italia, sometimes called the Italian, and especially the Toscano and the Colombo, sprung up near the railroad station to welcome immigrants coming in from the train. Local newspaper accounts were filled with lurid tales of stabbings, gangs, illegal gambling, and murders at the Toscano, located at 238 Lake Street. During Prohibition, the Colombo at 246 Lake Street had multiple run-ins with alcohol violations. After Prohibition, and with the liberalization of divorce laws in the early 1930s, the restaurants at these hotels expanded, and they took on kind of a swanky look. They became one of Reno's social centers, hosting service clubs, conventions, and private parties for weddings, birthdays, and every type of family occasion. There were just hundreds and hundreds of references to all kinds of special gatherings that happened at these once seedy restaurants. It was the food, however, that made the restaurants famous. As early as 1920, newspaper ads mentioned chicken raviola dinner at the Colombo, and for a couple of decades, the Toscano and the Colombo actively competed for the community's attention. Some might even consider it the Ravioli Wars. The extensive advertising from this period displayed a real curiosity. The pasta was frequently referred to as raviola. Typesetting error, family idiosyncrasy, research, and I've done quite a bit of research, including putting Away with Words, if anyone's familiar with that show on public radio. Research has not showed up any kind of easy answer. The fame of the restaurants endured until the 1950s. Renowned New Yorker magazine writer A.J. Liebling wrote, while in Reno for his 6-week divorce, "It was at the Toscano Cafe that I heard an Italian rancher say, 'I want filet mignon with very mushroom, very, very mushroom.' All the juices of beef were in his voice, and the filet sounded better than anything I have ever tasted." Soon after, times changed and the Colombo became Ming's Chinese restaurant. A Reno Evening Gazette headline featured, quote, "Exotic Oriental dishes take place of Italian delights at famous old eating house." Dennis Myers once called Lake Street Paradise Lost, mourning the loss of its multi-ethnic past. Now, the last vestige of this international legacy, the Santa Fe, sorry, that is my cat, restaurant, has closed its doors, bringing a long and rich cultural heritage to an end. My piece on the Riverside was in the spring 2019 issue, and I emphasized the dining and socializing at the famed hotel, which was arguably the most prestigious and dominant location in Reno. For over a century, the Riverside Hotel has fed, housed, and entertained locals and visitors alike. It has outlasted several versions of the building and the adjacent Virginia Street Bridge. And this was one of the earlier versions. This is the enclosed veranda. The hotel site is often called Reno's first address. From 1860, the spot witnessed a succession of modest structures that provided food and shelter. This was Myron Lake's world in the early years, and this early structure was actually called the Lake House. And you can see the courthouse, the earlier version of the courthouse beyond it. I love this picture because you can see how today's version of the Virginia Street Bridge echoes the shape of this 1877 version, a tied arch bridge, which was made from iron. In 1888, 4 years after Myron Lake's death, his son-in-law, William Thompson, took over the lake house, renaming it at that point the Riverside Hotel. Thompson thoroughly renovated the interior and improved the grounds. A free coach met all arriving trains to transport guests directly to the hotel. Things changed radically when Henry Goss arrived on the scene in 1906. The small frame hotel was transformed into a stunning chateau-esque version. The Reno Evening Gazette on May 3rd, 1907 described the newly finished barroom as, quote, among the very best in Nevada. Its furnishings were sumptuous and the hotel touted the large and modern kitchen and dining room. The veranda, which will be featured in the summer accommodations, will be enclosed in glass and give a beautiful view of the Truckee. When ready, it will be among the finest on the Pacific coast. Despite its imposing brick structure, the Riverside was destroyed by fire on March 15, 1922. The Nevada State Journal reported jagged remnants of walls and gaunt chimneys where revelry has reigned. Goss lacked the finances to rebuild. It fell to George Wingfield, Reno's most powerful man at the time, to commission well-known local architect Frederick de Longchamp to design the building still seen today. The 6-story brick building, the tallest in Nevada at the time, featured Gothic revival touches and terracotta trim. The hotel opened in 1927 after 10 months of construction, and it flourished for over 3 decades. Starting in 1935, Wingfield leased out the food and gaming operations to his longtime business partner, Nick Abelman. Here you see Wingfield lording over his domain. This dining room was fancy enough to have carved ice sculptures. This was the heyday of Reno's fame as a divorce capital, and the hotel attracted such famous guests as Gloria Vanderbilt and Claire Booth Luce. Reporters from the Associated Press, United Press, and others camped out in the hotel lobby, spotting celebrities and looking for an exclusive story. The rich and famous created a posh atmosphere with a supper club and dancing. Soon, the Riverside captured the spot as Reno's most popular hotel. Here you can see some ads touting the hotel and its restaurants. The Riverside's ground floor offered various retail services, including a barber and beauty shop, a cigar and candy shop, a fur shop, a travel shop, and even a branch of George Wingfield's banks. And here's the coffee shop and soda fountain. The Riverside's theater restaurant went by many names, including the Redwood Room, the Riviera Room, and for the extent of the Winter Olympics in 1960 at Squaw Valley, they renamed it the Olympic Room. The corner bar, which is right over here, became a popular spot for Reno movers and shakers. Red brocade wallpaper, a horseshoe bar, and a piano player who took requests made this power spot for lawyers, gamblers, entertainers, and politicians. The Riverside faced demolition in 1997 until Sierra Arts partnered with ArtSpace, a Minneapolis-based developer of historic properties, to convert the hotel rooms into artist lofts. The Riverside now is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The riverfront has never looked better, with a new bridge outside its doors. Best of all, there's the Wild River Grill. This popular watering hole and restaurant brings back a bit of glamour and a lot of history to this important address. I calculated that I have done almost 30 stories for Edible Reno-Tahoe, and I can only touch on a couple of them here today. Let me give you a sense of some of the other stories, and remember, you can read any of them online at their website. Oops, sorry. Gold Rush, I explored honey's riches in early Nevada and introduced me to the interesting story of Lorenzo Creel. It was in the fall 2016 issue. Picnics in summer 2017. And it was interesting for me to see how the automobile impacted people's leisure time and how to have food to go. For the Cooks 2018 issue, I paid homage to the trailblazers at UNR's home economics program, and I called it Breaking Out of the Kitchen. The winter 2019 issue was on food insecurity, and this was a tough one for me to find images, but I tied it to the magazine theme, and I was able to find out some interesting things about bread lines, soup kitchens, and other programs in Reno over the years. Starting from a fascination with the old beer garden at the McKissick Hotel in Reno, I researched beer gardens in a piece called Hoisting a Stein for the Drinks 2020 issue. Another favorite recent piece was the McKean number 22, a V&T railroad car that was converted into a diner, and it has been beautifully and lovingly restored at the Train Museum in Carson City. Now there are the ones that got away but still might happen. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are stories where I just can't find images, or sometimes I can't find the supporting information. Or sometimes, like here, the publisher just doesn't like the story. And here's one on food and fair contests. I'm convinced I'll write this one sometime. This is the food building at the Transcontinental Exposition that was here in Reno in 1927. This was trying to tie into the wellness issue. I found this incredible picture about obesity from Mason Valley. Spuds did it. I kind of pitched that. They didn't care for that story. As I mentioned earlier with the Chisholm story, there are quite a few other ice cream companies I could explore in the future. There are the famed restaurants like Eugene, the Christmas Tree, and here the Lancer. And in the annual Cooks issue, I sometimes uncover stories about cooks that are quite interesting, but I sometimes can't find enough information to do a whole column on them. None of these would be possible without help in my research. Through these many stories, I've met many wonderful storytellers and the keepers of that history. I love the interviews I get to do with people. It's been an honor to talk and learn from many of them. I especially want to thank the Nevada Historical Society, UNR Special Collections, wonderfully for pictures, a wonderful site that I use frequently, Nevada History Through Pictures, Collections, and Personal Stories. My friend Bruce Titus, who sometimes works with me to try to get the best image we can of some of these old photographs. RenoHistorical.org, which is one of the projects that HARPS works on. And if you're not familiar with Reno Historical, you can either have it on your phone as an app, or you can go to it online. The internet, of course, is always invaluable. And finally, I'd like to thank HARPS and the Washoe County Library for inviting me to speak tonight. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a good story to tell or to suggest, or even just a little nibble, or maybe you're just sitting on a great old photo or a clipping that you think might be interesting to me, here is my contact information. And of course, you can invite me back for a Taste of History Part 2, because I have so many more stories to tell. And I'd like to thank you all for being such a good audience tonight.
Thank you, Sharon. That was wonderful. So
Should I take my share away?
I don't know. I think it's good. It might as well have it for a little bit more if anybody wants to write that down. Do we have
Oh, yeah.
any questions? Let's see. Trying to read. See if we have, I'm not seeing any questions here at the moment. Judy, do you know of any questions that I might be missing?
Hi, I just checked Facebook and it doesn't appear there are any questions there.
Okay. Well, it was wonderful. You covered so much, Sharon, and in such a nice variety of foods and drinks and ethnic as well of, the different foods. So do you have anything else you want to bring up? I mean, since you know it so intimately, maybe Carol has a question or an idea as well.
Well, I had a detail. It doesn't have anything to do with food, but when you showed the V&T map, just below Carson City, there was a town named Stewart. And I think that's a very old map. So once upon a time, was there a town named Stewart? I thought,
I don't know. So you're saying that that particular map that I showed
yes,
had something, how far
yeah,
down was it? I mean, the V&T, it eventually went to Minden in that area.
yeah. But
Was it by like Franktown, kind of in that area on the map?
oh, don't I don't want you to try to.
Well, okay, so you, Douglas, Stewart. Oh, you know what that is? That's the Stewart Indian School.
And placed on the map like that.
Yeah, it would
Oh,
make sense as they were coming out of Carson like that,
okay.
that was a big establishment.
And was there a town named Douglas? I mean, the county is Douglas.
That I don't know. I did know the train went down there. I really don't know
Yeah,
why there is something named Douglas.
it's interesting what the towns were at that point in time. I mean, from Reno, you see Anderson's, Huffacres, Browns. Those were all stops on the V&T line.
Right. They were big ranches and they stopped there. I remember a number of years ago, we Harps offered a tour of, was it Huffacre House? Was it of the ranch house there? Am I right, Sherry? And I know they had, as you went up the stairs, they had framed they had all kinds of memorabilia about the railroad, about the V,
I
because
think
it
it
was a
was
stop there.
Holly is the one that helped.
Claire
with
Ash,
the
oh, I know
family.
Claire. Hi, Claire.
As I say, I think Holly is the one that worked with the family to create that tour, and it was limited at the time.
Wasn't that the Brown? It's called the Brown House, though. It's not the Huffacre
I
House.
couldn't remember which ranch it was.
It's south of DeMonte Ranch on Old Virginia Street.
I see somebody raise their hand, but I don't know that I can.
Let's see, I don't see it. Oh, there is a question over here about other old restaurants. Yes, Glee came in to say it was a Stewart Indian colony.
Yeah,
And
that's what I.
Lumana is saying, what about other old restaurants?
I got a list of them, Like I said, some of the most notable ones, like like Eugene's or the Lancer or something. But people have pitched Festina's early, pizza. I mean, there's just I collect these things, and when it's a right match between what my assignment is, I cook the no pun intended, but I have to cook this stuff up myself. I'm just about done with it. It's an amazing story. I'm working on for the drinks issue. And I decided I don't want to do alcohol. What else? I was trying to keep it broad. I was thinking, what else could I do? And I got interested in early coffee roasting and just the whole progression of coffee, which was a little bit like what happened with pasta, in that, for a while there was a lot more roasting going on, but at the turn of the last century, vacuum sealed coffee, Hill's Brothers in a vacuum tin, they got that technology right. And so people just could buy their coffee anywhere, just like they could buy their pasta anywhere. So it was kind of interesting. And that's the story I thought I was going to write. And then I found out that there was the first coffee roaster probably in the state was up in Virginia City, and there was a murder. And I mean, there's just this great story. And I said, okay, I didn't know about that. That's not where my research started, but that's what the story I'm writing about now. And some of the research I've done about coffee roasting and coffee in general, I've just saved it, in a different file. And who knows, if I continue writing this column for a few more years, I may just do that for another drinks issue. But like I said, it's like a rabbit. I mean, Sherry knows because she's helped me. It's a rabbit hole sometimes. I never know where it's going. Was there anything else? Thank you, Glee.
The question was, did de Longchamps live here since he designed many buildings?
Oh yeah, he was born here, and he was an architect here for over 60 years. His earliest major commission was the courthouse that we now see. And that was at the first decade of the last century. And he was designing sometimes kind of modest homes up into the 1960s. There are some of his houses around Sharon Way, and they're fairly modest brick homes. But in between, he did the Riverside. I always take people on tours to the corner right where the Pioneer, because I say, okay, Pioneer, it's like a quick lesson in different architecture 101. You can look at the courthouse and it's Beaux-Arts, all that fancy work. And then, 20 years later, he's designing a very streamlined art moderne post office. And then he builds, this sort of pseudo Gothic high rise for the Riverside. And right there, and then nothing happens until the Pioneer is built, so, which he did not design, but he was very, very prominent in this community for over 60 years.
Isn't the house that he either was born in or lived in as a child just east of the art museum?
It is across, my understanding is it's across from where Bertha Miranda's is.
Yes, yeah.
Is that the same site?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Oh, the Automobile Museum.
What did I? Yes.
I thought you said art, but maybe you said
I think I said auto museum, but maybe.
Yeah, no, you may have. I'm a little. Well, I love chatting with you. Are there any other questions?
That is all I see.
Sorry that there's not more response.
Well, people are
No,
still.
this is great.
I think this was a great program. We covered a lot of history, in addition to food and wine and turkeys.
Yeah, and there's even more turkey stories. That's what's even crazier.
Wow.
But I can't keep doing. And donuts. I mean, there's another whole theme I can go down, the history of donut shops. And I mean, there's just where there's people, there is food.
Well, I think we probably should turn it back to Judy.
Okay, well, thank you everyone out there for coming. And I'm sure that wonderful presentation from Sharon just made everyone hungry. I think it's time for dinner and dessert, or dessert and then dinner, or a repeat.
Or a stiff drink.
Exactly. So thank you again, Sharon Honig-Bear.
Thank you, Judy.
You're welcome, Carol Coleman and Cheryl Hayes Zorn with the Historic Reno Preservation Society, and of course, our Amanda, our Washoe County Library System tech wizard in the background for making this event possible today. All of you made this possible. And don't forget to sign up for the next Historic Reno Preservation Society event in January, the first Tuesday. And that event will be up on our website shortly. So check back for that. It's going to be a good one. So we just want to thank you all and let you go for the evening. And thank you again.